All right, welcome everybody. This is episode 4 of the Tide Hoops History Summer Podcast Series. I'm your host, Michael Southern, and we have been so fortunate this summer to have some great guests. And for this podcast, we have a very special one. Not only is he a former Alabama basketball player, but he is also the former head coach at the university. And to my knowledge, the only person to have won a SEC championship as both a player and a coach. That is Mark Gottfried. Coach Gottfried, once again, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Looking forward to this conversation. There's so many things I want to talk to you about as both a player, a coach, the current state of Alabama basketball. But again, thanks for joining me tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm excited. I love the background right there. That background,
Yeah.
the Coliseum, that brings back all kind of good memories.
Yeah. So to give you a little history from my perspective, Coach, your team when you played for Coach Sanderson in the '80s, those were my teams. That's when I started following Alabama basketball. I really started with the '82 team with Enos Watley, but I got to tell you, your '86-'87 team, that is my most beloved Alabama basketball team of all time. And I remember the 3 years that you played there. I think what if you're okay with this, I kind of just start at the beginning now. You are originally from the Midwest. Is that correct? Aren't you from Ohio?
Yeah, I was born in Ohio. My family, they're originally just north of Columbus. They're like north central Ohio. But then we moved to Alabama while I was in high school there, moved down to Mobile.
So now you played at what's now what, UMS, right? I think that it was UMS Prep.
There you go. Yeah, when I was there, we had the boys' school, and then the girls, Julius T. Wrights was down the kind of on a few miles away. And even though we interacted all the time, it was two separate schools. And then shortly after I graduated, I think within another 5 or maybe 10 years later, they combined both UMS and Wright. And so now they've just done a great job there. They've got such good tradition and academics. And I loved going there. It was a wonderful year.
So let me ask this. How did you end up moving from your family from Ohio to Mobile? How did that end up?
So my father was a small college basketball coach at a little school called Ashland College, and then he became the head coach at Southern Illinois University. So he was a Division I basketball coach for 3 years in Carbondale, and then like a lot of us, it all happens to us. They made a coaching change, and he came down to Mobile. A lot of people kind of don't know this part, but Cliff Ellis, who later became the coach at Auburn. Cliff was the basketball coach and the athletic director, and he hired my dad as the assistant athletic director, and really to kind of help him out being the AD. And then 1 year later, Cliff left South Alabama to go to Clemson as the head coach.
Oh, okay.
And then my dad got elevated up to South Alabama's athletic director, and then he held that position for I think 27 or 28 years. And so family moved in the summer of 1981. We went to Alabama, and my parents are still there, still in Mobile after all these years.
Wow, that's incredible. So now, when you were at UMS Prep, how many years did you actually play for the school? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
Only one.
1 year.
Only one. I moved in as a senior. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, so let me ask this then. So you obviously garnered some attraction from college scouts, because I know you played your first year of college at Oral Roberts, but who all was interested in you as a player? Was it Oral Roberts, and not did Alabama or anyone also not talk to you at that time?
Yeah, here's an interesting story on that. Wimp Sanderson recruited me. So did Sonny Smith. Both of them pretty hard.
Oh, both of them. Okay.
But Wimp at that time, Alabama, Enos Watley was just a freshman that year, and they were fully anticipating, Enos to be a couple of years. And so they recruited me, but, just kind of half-heartedly. And then I also took recruiting visits to Duke. I went to Ohio State. I went to Ole Miss. Duke at that time, Mike Krzyzewski was coming off his first year, and I think first or second. I think they were 11-18 back-to-back. And they weren't the Duke that we later learned about, but he was just beginning. But, my father knew the head coach at Oral Roberts really well. They were close friends. I went out there, and they actually had a really good team coming back. And so, I kind of surprised a lot of people and chose to go to Oral Roberts. And, Could have been at Ole Miss or Ohio State or Duke or Auburn or Alabama, all those. And but I decided to go there. And but after 1 year, it wasn't what I wanted, and I wanted to play at a higher level. And it turned
Mm-hmm.
out that Enos was leaving. Then he entered the draft, and Alabama had a little bit more of a need there for another guard.
Well, now I've heard Coach Sanderson, and he's been great to me these last 7 months. I've got to know him pretty well, and he's helped me a lot with what we're doing as far as trying to promote the history of Alabama basketball, especially with all these new fans that have come in. But he told me the funny story that when he was re-recruiting you, that you actually signed your papers, on top of a taxi cab at the airport or something like that?
That's a true story. Coach Sanderson had flown to Tulsa, and back then this was pre portal days. Way back then,
Oh, yeah.
you got the word out that you were going to transfer, and so Coach came out and got a hotel room there right across the street from the campus. And he called me. He said, "Mark, I'm going to stay here until you sign. I'm not leaving." And but about 1 or 2 nights went by. I felt so bad for him that he called, and I said, "Coach, I'm coming. I don't worry about it. I'm coming to Alabama." And so he took a taxi cab, and the taxi came right in front of the dorm. I walked out of the dorm at Oral Roberts. He pulled out the papers. I signed them on top of the taxi, and then he took off to the airport. So that's a true story on how it actually happened.
Well, he mentioned that to me, and I thought that was just hilarious. But I know Coach; he's pretty persistent. He doesn't give up. He is very persistent. I know that much. Especially, he's relentless in recruiting. He's telling me some other fun stories about recruiting, but that one stuck out about forcing you to sign the papers on top of a taxi cab. Now, when you came to Alabama, this is the old days of transfer. You had to sit out a year, didn't you?
I set out that that would have been 82 or let's see, 81, 80, 83, 84.
Okay.
And, Bobby Lee Hurt, Buck Johnson, they had a really good team. Got to the NCAA tournament. I think they had to go play in Nebraska somewhere out there and somewhere. But I set out that year, and I tell people all the time that it was actually a good thing for me. I'm glad I sat out a year. I know nowadays guys are just changing schools every year, but it gave me an opportunity to mature a little bit, academically, get a little bit farther ahead. And then get a little bit older and, get in the weight room and mature. So I wouldn't have traded that redshirt year for anything. I thought it was really a positive for me.
So after you set out 1 year and then you came and played in that 84-85 season, what was the adjustment like coming from the 1 year that you had at Oral Roberts back into the grind of the SEC? Because I know, back then you had the 18-game round robin home and home with everybody, and that was a meat grinder for teams and players back then.
I was so excited to play, and we had such good players. I remember our pickup games. Back then there was a gym back there, and we called it the lower gym. It was kind of on the back side of the Coliseum. You had to go down some stairs. There was a little bitty gym back there, but our pickup games were terrific. I mean, they were so good, and so. But I was just so excited to play at that level. I had grown up my whole life wanting to play at the highest level. I had gone to Oral Roberts, and I just knew in my gut, and I want to give this a shot to play at the highest level there is. And my family was in Alabama, so it made sense. Coach Sanderson did a great job recruiting me, but we had a good team that year. Not our best team, but that team, ended up going to the Sweet 16, and we had a great run there. But I think it set the table then for the next couple of years to come after that.
Well, what I was going to say is the 3 years that you played, Coach, you played in 3 SEC tournament finals. You won one of the SEC tournaments your senior year. You went to 3 straight Sweet 16. So I would say that that was a nice 3-year stretch that you were a part of. Now, I will say from my own personal memory, the one game, and I hate to bring up a sore spot, but the one game that still hurts is that loss to Auburn in the SEC tournament championship game at the BJCC in overtime. I remember that one because for some reason I couldn't watch it on television. I was listening to Paul Kennedy, and I was just agonizing those last couple of minutes of regulation, and then got to overtime. But do you remember much about that game at the BJCC?
Well, I can remember a couple things. First of all, Chuck Person, who was playing for Auburn at the time, was really good. I mean, really good. They had a good team with Moore and Gerald White and Frank Ford. They had a nice team. And, Jim Farmer and I, we're still really close. We probably talk every couple of weeks, and, we become great, great friends. But, at the end of that game, he missed a number of foul shots. And then I had the ball late and turned it over. I think I traveled. I can't remember, but we still labor over that. The two of us, we didn't finish the game out very well, but I can just remember how good Chuck Person was. That stood out to me more than anything. He could shoot that ball from deep, and he would take the ball out after made baskets, and then he would trail the play, and he would catch it and let her rip from the top of the key. And that was before the 3-point line too. And so anyway, we had a great year, but that one stung for still stings to this day, that loss to Auburn at championship.
So, you never like to lose to Auburn in anything, especially you could play for Alabama. But I will say that I always thought, years later when I look back at that period in the mid-'80s, what a glorious time for basketball in the state of Alabama, because Coach Sanderson and Coach Smith, they both had two programs competing at the highest level with some of the best athletes you've ever seen. And a lot of that was homegrown talent. A lot of those players came from this state. So that, to me, I always considered the 80s the golden age until maybe now with what's going on with Coach Oates and Coach Pearl. But I have such great memories of that. In 86, the next season in 85, 86, you had another great team. Went 13-5 in the SEC. You got to the SEC tournament championship game. Kentucky, losing to Kentucky 4 times that year, I know that had to be frustrating too as well, especially NCAA tournament. Why would the NCAA put Alabama, LSU, and Kentucky all in the same region? I always thought that was one of the worst seedings that Alabama ever got.
I agree. And, you got to think, though, the odds are in your favor if you get to play Kentucky for the 4th time that we're going to beat them. And
yeah,
you got to tip your hat to them. You really do. And, they had a really good team, and, they had the tradition and, all those type things. And, again, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I think, even though we didn't get past that point, those 2 years, which would have been that 85, 86, I really do think that kind of helped us, even though we got popped again in 87. But it helped us win the SEC championship, I think, the next year. And I think we went 16-2 in the next year. But that loss to Kentucky was another one. We had so many great wins, but we just kind of couldn't get over the hump. We probably weren't old enough yet. Maybe we weren't mature enough yet. But we were close. We just couldn't get over that hump.
So now let's talk about my favorite team. This was the team when I was a senior in high school and you were a senior in Alabama. The 86-87 team, no matter what, will always be my most beloved Alabama team. I listened to every game on the radio, or I watched it on Jefferson Pilot, or I tried to come to the game. So a lot of great memories. There's one game before we even get to the tournament run and everything else. Do you remember January 10th, 1987 against Vanderbilt? Do you remember your performance in that game?
That was not bad. I think I had a pretty nice game that day. I kind of remember.
Yeah, you did. You set the record for most 3-pointers, 8 3-pointers, and you had 29 points. You were on fire that game. You scored 29 points in 25 minutes. So in today's analytics, that's pretty good.
I used to run in years after that. I would run into CM from time to time, and I'd love to remind him about that, because they what happened on that game, to be very honest, was we were such a talented team that I'm sure they felt like they couldn't guard us man to man, so they played a lot of zone that night, which for me, my eyes lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And so, and I think they kind of just gambled that maybe I wouldn't make as many, or Jim, or Jim Farmer, but it ended up being a really fun night.
Well, that's really, it's not, I guess, kind of strange. That was the first year they introduced the 3-point shot. You set the school record at that time with 8, and that record lasted for quite a while at Alabama. I think it was until John Petty, and that hasn't been that long ago. So your record lasted for quite a bit in the first year they created the 3-point shot. So I remember that game too. I remember listening to it, and you couldn't miss that night. And I believe you're still the school record holder for 3-point field goal percentage in one season. So again, that's a that's a great record. And considering how many threes Alabama shoots now, that you still have that, that's pretty amazing. Let me ask you this too: the 86-87 team, you go 16-2. I think the most SEC wins by an Alabama team. You set the record for that. You roll in an SEC tournament. You roll through that. All right, you get to the NCAA tournament. You're playing in Birmingham. You roll through that. Now, before you came out to play New Orleans in the second round, did you guys see the end of the Providence Austin P game there at the BJCC? Yeah, I was talking to Coach Sanderson about that. Austin P should have won, should they not?
You're exactly right. You got a great memory, and I'm sure, Coach, we've talked about it a lot. But let me back up though real quick. We did go 16-2, and the two losses, believe it or not, both were buzzer beaters. Roger Harden at Kentucky hit one right there in Coleman Coliseum at the buzzer. Yep. And then we had a shot at Florida. Again, Jim and I, we laugh about it now because Jim Farmer was such a good player. But, I penetrated and pitched it over to him, and he had a pretty good look. He just missed it. And those were only two losses we had in an 18-game round-robin schedule. And I think we lost early in the season at Florida State. I think it was a buzzer beater. And then, Duke beat us, I think, by about 10 or 12 or something like that up in the Meadowlands. And so we didn't have a lot of tough losses in there. We were really, really talented, really good team. And just like you said, we were standing in the tunnel at the Birmingham Civic Center, and Austin P is playing Providence. And Austin P goes to the foul line with no time on the clock. That was before even where they had the decimal, the tenths of a second, and score tied. And all the guy had to do was make one foul shot. And we're sitting in there saying, God, if we beat New Orleans, we're playing Austin P in the Sweet 16. And lo and behold, the guy for Austin P misses both foul shots. Probably propelled Rick Pitino in that group a little bit. They got a second chance at life after that, and we ended up having to play Providence there in the old Freedom Hall in Louisville the following weekend.
So, I completely skipped over. You're right. Not only you only had two very close losses. You lost at Florida in overtime, and then of course Harden makes that crazy shot in Coleman. But don't forget, you guys went into Rupp and put a beating on them earlier in the season. You won by double digits in Rupp. And then the other game that really stood out to me was the last regular season game against Florida. When JJ comes down, hits a bank three to send it into overtime, and then you win it in overtime on a putback by Derek McKee with no time left. That was another crazy game that you guys were a part of. But here's what I always remember. That starting lineup: Terry Connor, you, Mark Gottfried, Jim Farmer at the 3, Michael Ainsley at the 4, Derek McKee at the 5. You had people coming off the bench like Keith Askins, Bill Devon, Craig Dudley, JJ. That team, your team had it all. You had senior leadership, you had a penetrator, you had a shooter, you had a Swiss Army knife in Jim Farmer, you had a shot blocker, scorer, Derek McKee, and a rebounder, Michael Ainsley. I thought you guys had the perfect team. That was the best Alabama team I always remember. So sorry I'm kind of gushing over them, but I still love your team. That team's always going to be my favorite. I mean, I know
it was interesting, and later I got into coaching, obviously, but that team, if you think about it, 86-87 for all of the people that can go that far back, like you and I can. But we had 3. Jim Farmer and I were 50-year seniors, so we were both 23 years old. Terry Connor was a senior. Derek McKee was the best player in the league that year. He was hands down. J.J. Jackson coming off the bench. J.J. was a 50-year senior. And, we joked about this story all the time, Jim and I, and, going into Kentucky. You mentioned going into Rupp Arena. And a few years later, a few years ago, I was scouting for the Mavericks for Dallas, and I had to do a game at Kentucky. And I'm sitting there, and Rex Chapman sat down beside me. And Rex said, Mark, I'm never going to forget that, because right at the jump ball, right before the ref threw the ball up in the air to tip it off in Rupp Arena that year, Jim Farmer and I, we were both a little bit older and probably a little cocky, but we both walked by Rex and gave him a little forearm shiver, a little bump, and I remember Jim saying it out loud. He said, Mark, he's just a boy, just a young boy. And we got into Rex's head that night, and he really didn't have a great game, and he's still grumpy about it. Rex is still mad about that one, but we had a lot of fun. But that team was it was a well balanced team, and but it was a very old and mature team too, and I think that really helped us.
I remember that Rex Chapman was a true freshman that year. He came in highly touted, and I remember you guys shut him down that matchup in Rupp. And I always, up until that season, I know you had two prior Sweet 16s. The way your team went through the SEC and won the tournament, I just knew. I felt so sure that your team was going to get to the Final Four because when I looked at the bracket, I knew Alabama could beat Georgetown because Georgetown was the 1 and Alabama was the 2, and I was like, could you imagine if you guys would have got down there and say you would have had a chance to play like Indiana for the championship that year because it was Indiana-Syracuse in the championship game that year? That would have been unreal.
That was such we had such a great team, and Rick Pitino, I think, was a little bit ahead of the game as far as utilizing the 3-point line, the 3-point shot. But Jim Farmer and I, we about a couple months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, I was back and flew into Nashville. We drove down to Birmingham and we spent a day with Coach Sanderson, and it was one of the great days. Man, I'm so thankful. But the three of us sat there, and this has to be whatever it is now, probably 30 something years ago or whenever that was, and the three of us are still miserable over that game. Like, we're still trying to figure it out, that how did, they get so hot that night. And Coach Sanderson kept saying, I must have done something wrong. And we said, Coach, you didn't do anything wrong. But it was just one of those games that it stung hard. And because we really did believe that year we were going to the Final Four. And that was a tough one.
So the first time I ever cried for Alabama athletics was the night that Alabama basketball lost to Providence in Louisville. I was 17 years old, and I just cried like a baby when the game was over because I thought for sure this was the one. This was the team that was going to do it. And yeah, that hurt so bad. I know it was even worse for you guys as players, but it still doesn't diminish what you guys accomplished. One of the best Alabama teams I've ever seen. And the reason, I like doing this is because, that was, like you said, 34 years ago. People don't need to forget how good that team was. That team was excellent. One of the best teams in Alabama history. Let me ask you this. After your playing career, when did you decide you wanted to go into coaching? How did that happen?
I got drafted. I got drafted by Detroit, and that was back, if you remember now, that was when the Detroit Pistons that was the bad boy era. They were awfully good.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And I got cut by that team, and, I had a ton of opportunities to go play back then. The G League was called the CBA back then, and then, some opportunities overseas. But I wanted to play for Athletes in Action. It was a Christian basketball team and travel all over the world, and so I did that. And then the next year, Detroit called and they invited me back and signed me as a free agent. So I'm thinking, okay, I got a real shot here. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to go to UCLA. I'd met Jim Herrick and start as a graduate assistant. So I'm thinking, if I really do want to coach, here I'm sitting on this opportunity to go to UCLA, and I felt like it was something. I just didn't want to turn that down. There have been times throughout the years I look back and say, maybe I should have given it one more years, to crack at it to get in the NBA. But it was such a great opportunity to go to UCLA. And so I just didn't want to turn that down.
So let me ask this. Are Coach Sanderson and Coach Herrick alike or total opposites?
They're polar opposites. And
really?
Here's what I learned early on as a coach.
All right.
Here's what I learned, that you learn quickly. There's a whole lot of different ways to do this, and, I loved playing for Coach Sanderson. He was so good. And Coach was such a demanding guy. I tell people all the time, I practiced on Christmas Day all 4 years I was at Alabama. I didn't have Christmas Day off. I mean, we practiced hard, and he demanded that you played hard. Never, ever had 2 days off in a row during the season. Then I end up going to UCLA, and I'm learning from Jim Herrick. And I remember the very first weekend, and we practiced, I think, Monday to Friday. We get to Friday, and Jim says, "All right, guys, we'll see you Monday." And I was like, "Wait, well, what? We're not going to practice this weekend?" And and Jim's had a different philosophy, and both philosophies are good. Both are right, and but just different. Now, the one thing that they both had in common is their competitive nature. They wanted to win. They just had a different way of going about it, and I learned so much from both Coach Sanderson, and obviously through Jim Herrick as well.
So let me ask this. I know you were with Coach Herrick for several years. Now, did you recruit Ed O'Bannon? Did you help recruit Ed O'Bannon?
So Ed, Charles, Toby Bailey, Tyus Edney,
I just
some good ones.
Would you ever imagine that back then when you recruited Ed O'Bannon, where we would be today from Ed O'Bannon and the lawsuit and NIL? Oh my goodness. That's just, I was looking that up and I realized that you were there and I thought that you might have recruited him. So I wanted to ask you about that.
5 of the 7 years I was at UCLA, we had Ed. So I was with him for 5 of my 7. And I was with him probably a couple months ago. I was with Ed and Charles. We had a little event at UCLA, and they invited all the former coaches and players back. But, I told Ed that night, and, every player in America, every player, male, female, doesn't matter, any sport, they have to give 1% of whatever they're making off an NIL and send it write a check and send it to Ed O'Bannon because
that's right.
Yeah. Ed is the genesis of it. He started it. He's the one that organized the class action lawsuit that they sued the NCAA, and it really originated over EA Sports. EA Sports had a game, and they had the '95 national championship team, and although they didn't mention the players' names, they all looked like certain players. The guy that wore number 31, and he was a tall, slender black guy. That was Ed O'Bannon, left-handed. And, he wasn't making any money off that game. And so he started it and, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And kids are making money today. If it weren't for Ed O'Bannon, it would have never happened because the NCAA did not want to do it. They did not want to do it until they were forced into doing it, which happened here in the last couple of years. And that was really only because of the Supreme Court. So Ed O'Bannon was certainly the catalyst for all of the young players being able to make some money right now.
So you were with Coach Herrick. You helped him win a national championship. When did you get the call from Murray State, or how did that happen that you ended up as the head coach at Murray State?
Well, it was interesting. Dave Hobbs had offered me a job that year in '95 to come back to Alabama as an assistant. And
okay.
That was before the NCAA tournament. And what happened was we were really good. We were the number 1 seed of the ones that year. We ended up 31-2, but we had rolled through the Pac. Back then it was called the Pac-10, but we went through the Pac-10 conference. And then as we got into the tournament, as our team kept winning, all of a sudden it's like, okay, we got a real shot at winning a national championship. And I remember, Murray State called me. I think it was maybe the week of the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. And, I had some interest in that, but, I was so locked into our team at UCLA. And even after we won it, the national championship, I wasn't convinced I was going to go anywhere. And I tell people all the time, we win the national championship on a Monday night. We fly back to LA Tuesday from Seattle. Wednesday, we're at a parade at Disneyland. On Thursday, we're throwing out the first pitch at Dodger Stadium. And then on Friday, we're on the Jay Leno show. And so here I am, I'm doing all this kind of stuff. And Murray State, the athletic director, keeps calling me and, asking me if I'm going to fly in or not. And I was kind of enjoying the
I don't blame you.
All that was going on. But, once I went into Murray and, every coach they've ever had has done a good job. They've won there. And I just felt it was a great opportunity for me to learn how to be a head coach at a program where there's been some winning. And then hopefully that can lead into something else.
Well, I would say you did quite well because if I'm not mistaken, you were there for 3 years and you won the OVC 3 years in a row in 2 NCAA tournaments, if I'm correct on that? Yeah, so I would say you did quite well. So let me ask this. When you finally became the head coach of your own program, what tidbits did you take from Coach Sanderson and what did you take from Coach Herrick and what was all from Coach Gottfried?
It's interesting. That's a great question. What happens is you still have to be yourself. Every coach, obviously, I do a podcast. I just had Jay Wright on, and Jay was talking about when he worked for Raleigh Massimino at Villanova. He was the assistant, and then he went to UNLV. But same thing. Early on, he was trying to be Raleigh, and he couldn't. And for me, I couldn't be Jim Herrick, and I couldn't be Wimp Sanderson. Both guys are really good, and both guys were guys that I could always call anytime I was kind of stuck in a situation or I needed advice or, hey, this is going on with this player or, just whatever it might be. And both Coach Sanderson and Jim Herrick, all throughout the years, those guys were so good to me. And they would always pick up the phone, always offer their opinions, but they never would tell me what to do. It was always, here's some things to think about, Mark. Here's a couple things, or here's a situation I was in back, years ago. And so but I still had to be myself. And, but I had such a great foundation with both those two guys. They'd really helped me a lot.
So after 3 years with Murray State, someone from Alabama gave you the call, the old mama's calling. So what were your thoughts when you got called to gauge interest in coming back to Alabama?
Well, if you remember right, Dave Hobbs, they made a decision to terminate Dave, and that was probably mid-January. Yeah. And so there was a lot of basketball left in the season. And I remember walking into practice at Murray State, and I had 6 players on our roster from the state of Alabama and at Murray State. And I remember walking in to practice. It was maybe on the Monday after a Saturday. I can't remember, but I walked in, and it was full of the Alabama media. They had all driven up to Murray.
They've driven up
television cameras everywhere, and my players are shaking their head like, "What in the heck's going on here?" And so we had a really good team at Murray State that year, matter of fact. And because I had so many guys from Alabama, obviously their parents and relatives were hearing that I could be a candidate, but nobody from Alabama had reached out to me until the end of the season. So I never heard from Alabama, never talked to Alabama until the end of the year. And that's kind of when it all started once the season ended.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the reporters came up there just on a hunch. There really wasn't any official channels yet. Oh, wow. So when you did get the call, what were your thoughts? Was it a case of like, yes, I want to do this? Or did you really have thinking like, I don't know. Do I want to go back to my alma mater? I know the program's kind of falling on hard times. Do I want to do that? Do I want to still stay here at Murray State? What was going through your head at that time?
Well, here's the interesting part of that. Obviously, my heart was in Alabama, having played there. And but the year before, both Georgia and Tennessee were both open. And we got to the tournament, and we played Duke. We were the 15 seed, and Duke was the 2 seed. And we're up 6 at the half. And they ended up beating us by 2. And we actually kind of had a heave at the end. But, we had actually, a chance to win. And I just couldn't get excited, believe it or not, about Georgia or Tennessee. I in the back of my, deep in my heart, I just felt like, and I wasn't rooting against Dave Hobbs at all, but I just kind of felt like, at some point, if the Alabama job opens up, maybe I'd have an opportunity. And you have to remember back then, Bob Backrath was the athletic director. Mal Moore was the assistant athletic director. And I met with Bob, and here's Murray State trying to do everything they can to keep me. They're offering me more money than they had at the time. And I kept saying, guys, you can't come up with that kind of money. And that's not really even fair for me to ask you to, because it was just so much. And then I think Bob, when he first started off, to be quite honest, he kind of lowballed me. And I remember getting in the car. I met with him in Nashville. I drove back to Murray, and I about wanted to throw up. I really did. And I'm thinking to myself, here's my alma mater. And I think Bob maybe felt like he could get me for real cheap. I don't know. But it was really disappointed. He'd offered me the job. And I told him I'm not taking it. I'm not taking the Alabama job. And I went back to Murray. Believe it or not, I got a phone call that next day from Arizona State. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, okay, I really want to go to Alabama, but if they're not going to step up and do this right, and I may end up going to Arizona State. And so it took a week or two for all that to work itself out. And I met with Mal Moore when I came down and visited one day, and Mal kept telling me, he said, Mark, don't worry about all this, and this is home for you. And Mal was so good. But Bob had a different way of going about it, and I almost didn't take it. How about that one?
Well, you wouldn't be the first Alabama head coach you made, man. How about that? You know what I mean by that, right? That's about the only way I can put that. So I know you came back. You came back to your alma mater. I know the first 2 years that you took the head coaching job, you were in rebuild mode. And we all know that the secret to success in any college athletics is recruiting. So I imagine it took you at least a year or two to get your legs back underneath you to get the recruiting pipeline going. But I would say in year three, we could see things starting to turn around. That was the 2000-2001 season. I think Gerald Wallace was in that class. You had some other players that come through. You had some talent coming. When did you feel the tide really starting to turn? Was it that season being back?
Well, here's what I would say, and I've told a lot of young coaches this. Now we're in a different climate now, because with the portal, you can build it faster now. You couldn't build it as fast then, and Alabama had struggled. They weren't great, and I had some pretty decent seniors that first year. Brian Williams was a really good player. Jeremy Hayes, and we had some nice players, but not the level that we needed. And that first recruiting class at the end of that year, coming into the next year, that was Erwin Dudley, Rod Grizzard, Terrence Mead, and Kenny Walker, those four. And they were really the foundation. And what I did, I made a decision that I was going to start them all as freshmen, and they're going to play. And, we're going to take some lumps along the way. But I felt like in year 2 or 3, as those players became a little bit older, then we'd have a chance to be really good. And, when we added Gerald, then we went to the NIT championship game in New York City. And then the following year after that is when that group really kind of matured. And that 2002 year, then, obviously we won the SEC championship. So that was the plan. The plan was to sign them, play them, take some lumps. And if you go back and remember those first, maybe that's my second year, which would have been Erwin and Terrence and Rod's freshman year. We could beat somebody really good, and then we'd lose to somebody really bad. I mean, we were all over the board, up and down.
It's youth. It's just the youth. Yeah.
And they were just so young. And but the experience they had to play early, I think, really helped them guys a lot.
Well, if you look at your 2001-2002 team, you also added a pretty talented freshman that year with Mo Williams. So I think he kind of helped things too along that line, because you would have had Erwin, who was SEC Player of the Year. I think Mo was Freshman of the Year. You had Rod Grizzard, Kenny Walker, Terrence Mead. And then you also had another surprise hero, a walk-on with red shoes, who won the Florida game for you to clinch the SEC regular season championship. I was in the stands when your team made the rally in the second half, and when Antoine made that layup. I got to tell you, that was an unbelievable sight. I saw March Madness just run out of the court. It was crazy. I know that wasn't a design play for Antoine at the end, was it? Because he got that off of this shot or a rebound. Or no, it was a pass. It was a pass. He got it on the right side in the layup. And, yeah.
Right. Ernest Shelton. Ernest made the pass. And, it was such a magical – that was just magical.
That was a great season.
And win the league. And but Mo Williams was the difference maker in that team. We had everybody coming back, but when we added Mo in, that he just took us to a whole nother level. And he was I think he was a Sporting News magazine National Freshman of the Year. I think he was the Freshman of the Year in the SEC. But he had the pieces around him, and all we had to do is kind of plug him in there. And then, to be quite honest, Antoine made Antoine Petway just such an impact. And I remember recruiting Antoine and talking to him about coming as a walk-on, and we laugh about it now, but I burst that little guy's bubble. And I remember his father, Joe Petway, at the end of his first year, I put him on scholarship, and Joe called me and said, "Thank you, Coach, for putting my son on scholarship." He said, last year I had to sell 2 cows just to pay for his tuition, so I don't have to sell any more cows. And Pet ended up being such a great piece for that team too. But What a great group of guys all together. So much fun.
So here's another interesting question I've always wanted to ask you, Coach. How does it feel? What's the difference in feeling winning an SEC championship as a player and then winning one as a coach?
That's a great question. When you're a player, it was special. You got 10 or 11 other players, you're just one of the group, When you're the head coach, it feels a little different because there's only one of you. And I remember, I tell the story a lot. I think it was my first year at UCLA. I was the graduate assistant. We were going to we were at Cal. We were going to shoot around that morning, like 11 o'clock. And I remember sitting in the front seat with Jim Herrick and asked him, I said, what's the biggest difference between being an assistant coach and a head coach? And he looked right at me as calmly as he could. And he just said the word lonely. And I didn't understand it until later when you become a head coach. You go, boy, he had that one right. And so, when you lose a game as a head coach, it feels so much different than when you were a player. You go home, you lay in the bed, you stare at the ceiling all night long, you can't sleep. You're trying to figure out what you did wrong. What could I have done differently to help our players? And so when you win, it does feel a whole lot different as a head coach.
Well, I know that for me, that 2002 season was just like a walk in the park of old memories. Now I felt like, hey, this is what I remember growing up as a teenager in the 80s. Alabama basketball is back. And you put together a great run, very much like what Coach Sanderson did too, because the next year you took Alabama to its first ever number one ranking in the polls, I think for 2 weeks at the end of 2003. So you had that. But then let's talk about 2004, the magic run to Elite Eight. I know you played a tough schedule. That's one of the reasons why you still got in the NCAA tournament. You played a tough non-conference schedule. I think you went 8-8 in the regular season, but you get in the tournament. When you got into the NCAA tournament, what was your message to the team? How did you get them to rally the way they did? Because you went out to Seattle and you came out with 2 big wins.
It's a great question. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. We go to Seattle, and I think that was the year, I got to get this right. I want to say it was Mike Shula. But anyway, the spring game that year, Alabama football, their spring game was that weekend. They scheduled the spring football game, the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. And,
it was. I remember that.
And I can remember guys on the radio team, Tom Stipe and Tom Roberts and all the guys. They were disappointed because Alabama was wanting them guys to stay back and broadcast the spring football game and not go to the tournament. And here they are. They've been with us for 30 games. And I had to sit down with Mal on that Monday morning and say, Coach, you got to let the radio guys come with us. Well, we go to Seattle and there's nobody there really. It's close friends and family. We got wives and a couple parents and really nobody's there. As far as the fan base from Alabama. And we had to play Southern Illinois that first game, who was a good team. And Petway made a little floater there in the paint late in the game and gave us some life. And then another funny part of that is we go back to the hotel. We were staying at the Grand Hyatt in downtown Seattle. And the general manager of the hotel, he lined up all of the support people in the hotel. You had the maids and the people working in the restaurant. And he gave them all red, white pom-poms. And they were all cheering for our team as we came back in because we didn't have any fans there.
Oh, man.
And then we had to play Stanford, obviously. They were number one in the country. They were 30-1. Really, really good basketball team. But, there's nothing magical that I think a coach says. It's not like you have magic dust. We just had a group of guys that they believed they could win. And they played hard. They played together. Kennedy Winston, Ernest Shelton, Chuck Davis, Evan Brock, those guys, Jamario Davidson, Emmett Thomas, obviously Petway, Demetrius Smith. We had a group of guys that they were a great group of high character guys. And, we just went on that run. And the win over Stanford just was such a massive win, for us. In that second round game when you got to play the 1 seed and they're 30-1. They were the one of the ones. And being able to beat them, I think, was just a really special moment for Alabama basketball.
I think Mike Montgomery was the coach of Stanford. I think, I think that was right. But you were 100% right about the spring game, because I was actually covering the spring game. The game had finished, but everybody had the Stanford game on the TV monitors, and no one was right. I wasn't writing. I was sitting there watching the game, and you guys fell down by, I think, by 11 with like 8 minutes left in the game, and next thing you know, you took the lead, and we're like, what happened? Where did that come from? But that was a great rally by the team there. So let me ask this then. I know you said there's no magic dust or speech, but you upset Stanford. You're in the Sweet 16. This is a place that you got to 3 times as a player. Now you're going to Phoenix, and not only are you going to the Sweet 16, where a place that Alabama's never been past, you're playing the defending national champion Syracuse. So, what did you tell your team going into the Syracuse game?
Great question, and I do remember this one because Petway Antoine has reminded me of this many times. And
Yeah.
They had a lot of guys back from the national championship, Hakeem Warwick and Jerry McNamara, and they had a good team. But I remember, and I told Petway, we break the huddle, we're walking out to for the opening tip, and I grabbed the 5 starters. And Petway was reminding me of this many times. I said, guys, you guys all look down at that bench down there at Syracuse right now, because I don't see Carmelo Anthony down there anymore. So I think it just kind of, we had such a good shooting team, with Kennedy and Ernest Shelton and Petway and Emmett Thomas, that I think our guys felt like we're going to see that zone, and we're going to chop it up like a side of fries. And they did. And so, it was just one of those games that our team played really well. And now here we go. Now we're sitting there, and we're 1 game away, and we're in the Elite Eight, and you haven't get opportunity to play UConn.
So, when the game was over, after you had beaten Syracuse, what were you thinking as a coach, knowing that you had just taken Alabama basketball to a place it has never been?
Here's the part of that I remember very well. When I was very young, my dad was a small college basketball coach, and he would take our family, my sister and I, my parents, to Final Fours. And so I was in Salt Lake City when Bird and Magic went at it. I was in Indianapolis.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Watching Isaiah and the Indiana, and they played Virginia and LSU and North Carolina. And then I was at all these Final Fours growing up, and a lot of times I had to sit in the top row, but I was in the building. And so now here I am as a coach, and it was always my dream to take Alabama to the Final Four. That's what I wanted to do more than anything, is get them in the Final Four. And now, I know we're 40 minutes away. We're 1 game away. And that probably resonated with me more than anything at that time. Having been a player at Alabama and now being the coach at Alabama, we're knocking on the door. All we got to do is play well for 40 minutes, and then we can reach that milestone.
Well, that was an incredible run. One that, again, held the record for 20 years as the deepest run ever by Alabama. There's 2 more games during your tenure I kind of want to get your feedback, and these are the unusual games. So, 2006 NCAA tournament, San Diego Sports Arena, bomb threat or bomb scare. What in the world? I remember you were going to play Marquette, and it was going to be like I think a early morning or early afternoon game, and the game gets delayed by 4 to 5 hours because of a bomb scare. What? How did you keep the team focused? Because obviously whatever you did worked for Jean Felix, because he comes out and goes for 31 points in that game.
That was one of the weirdest, craziest things. Now what you got to realize, both teams are in the same situation. So
true. No, you're right.
Marquette,
that's right. That's
just like us. But we just laid around a hotel, and I'm thinking, okay, my guy's going to get sluggish, and they're just laying around because it wasn't like okay, we can leave in an hour. You had no idea it was going to be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. You just kind of you're anxious and you're waiting, and it was very interesting, very strange. And I just remember, we played really well. Felix had just an amazing game, and I think we were the 10 seed and they were the 7 seed. And I don't think they thought they were losing to Alabama. I really don't. Maybe until just late in the game, and I think at that point they started to feel like this thing might get away from them. But that ended up being a really it was a great basketball game on the heels of just something very interesting and unique.
Yeah, and then you have a slugfest with the old school that you coached at, UCLA. It comes down to a 3-pointer at the end by Ron Steele. Otherwise, that game might have went to overtime. And I think UCLA got to the. Did they get to the championship game? Or I know they got to the Final Four that year, didn't they? So I can't. That one. Yeah, that one. All right, the other unusual game, 2008 SEC tournament. Mikael Riley's 3-pointer with a F3 tornado going on the outside that I guess no one knew about. Is that right?
Yeah, that was another. You could coach for 500 years, you may never have anything like that happen to you. And what I remember about that game in Atlanta was when the tornado hit the hurricane, the roof. I mean, hit the roof of the. When the tornado hit the roof, it sounded like a train was running over the top of the building. It was just this weird sound that you're like, what is that noise? And the action. We're going up and down the floor at that time, and we could hear it, but nobody knew what it was. And the interesting thing was that was in overtime. Mikael Riley hit the amazing on an out of bounds play. We're down 3, and he hits an amazing 3 to send it to overtime, which, thank God, I do believe with all my heart, probably saved a lot of lives, because if people would have exited the building, who knows what could have happened. But when the referees stopped the game, Alonzo G was going to the foul line. And we could hear these bolts dropping from the ceiling, hitting the floor. You look up and it's a long way up there. You think, good grief, one of the things going to hit somebody in the head. But Alonzo had just been fouled. I think we were down 2 or 3 at that time. And, they send us back to the locker room. And again, you're back in there. You don't know if this is going to be 5 minutes or 25 or an hour. And we were back there for a pretty good long time. But when we came back, there wasn't much time in the game left. I can't remember exactly. But I remember Alonzo having to go to the foul line for a front end of a 1-on-1, after we've been in the locker room.
Oh, yeah.
For an hour. And, he missed the front end of the 1-on-1. They went down, I think, hit a 3. Now you're down 5 and you're playing catch up. But it was just an unusual situation to be a part of. And the interesting thing was, even after that game, obviously we got beat. The next game of the evening was canceled, which was the Georgia game. And then Georgia had to play 2 games the next day so that they could finish the tournament in time for Sunday afternoon selection show. But that was just that was another one of those just wacky, weird things that happens in sports. And to be a part of it was really interesting.
So during your coaching career, you win an SEC championship. You go to the Elite 8, and then you also have a bomb scare, and you also play in the middle of an F3 tornado. So those are definitely some of the most memorable things you can ever have as the head coach anywhere, not much less Alabama. Another thing I wanted to talk to you or ask you about, Coach. Again, I know all coaching careers end at a place, but I can tell you in 2017, when they had the 30-year reunion of your team, and I was at the game because I've been going to the games for quite a while. Going into that one, me personally, I was wondering if you were going to be there, and deep down, I wanted you to be there because the 86-87 team is not the 86-87 team without Mark Gottfried. And when you came out there, I got to tell you, I was so happy to see you. And me personally, I really appreciate you coming back. I saw the podcast that you had with Coach Sanderson, and I know you said that it was a difficult decision, but I got to tell you personally, thank you for coming back. And again, I hope that that night with your former teammates was a good event for you.
It was one of the most special nights I've ever had, and you've set it up perfectly because I was coaching at NC State. I think they kind of planned that night. It was a can't remember what night it was. It might have been a Wednesday or Thursday, but we were off. And I remember when it first happened, Coach Sanderson called me, and I told him, I'm not coming, Coach. And what people have to understand about that is, when I played there and then I coached there, I loved the University of Alabama, still do. I loved it. And, you have to remember, the fans didn't fire me. Nobody, it was a decision that somebody made at the top of the food chain. But I told Coach, I said, I'm not coming. I don't want to walk back in that arena. And then Jim Farmer called me. And I said, Jim, you can call me 100 times. I'm not coming. Then Derek McKee called me. They all called me. They kept calling me. And I talked to my dad one night, and my dad said, Mark, that's your team. And Coach Sanderson was your coach, and you need to be there. And so I had a friend of mine in Raleigh that had a plane, and he flew me into Tuscaloosa, and it was really special. It really was a special night. I'm glad I went. And but and time always heals things, and it's healed for me. But at that time, I was still one of those guys saying my feet will never touch the inside of that building for the rest of my life. And I'm glad that they all kind of grabbed a hold of me and told me to get there. And then my dad, obviously, because it turned out to be the right decision, and it was a wonderful decision.
Well, like I said, I was so happy to see you, and to give you a little personal perspective from my end on that one. So I've been taking my daughter to Alabama home games since she was like 3 years old. But I started taking her back in 2013. About 2013. And, during that period, Alabama basketball was not Alabama basketball. It's not the Alabama basketball I grew up on. It's not what you coached. And so for those first formative years, no disrespect to the former players and coaches, she saw a lot of mediocre basketball. So when your team came out there, I was just gushing. I was telling her, like, you don't understand how good this team was. You don't understand what this team did. They went 16-2. They won the SEC. They won the SEC tournament. They were number 2 seed. And she was just looking at me like I was talking about fairies and unicorns. That's because she had no concept of what good basketball was yet. But for me, Coach, I was 17 again. When you guys came out there at halftime, I was 17 again. I was loving every minute of it. I got to tell you, this past year, too, the 20-year reunion of the Elite Eight team, when I saw everybody, again, unbelievable, great reception. And again, how did it feel to come back to be with your team, the team that you coached to the Elite Eight this past season?
It was really special. It was special to see those guys. And until this last year with Alabama's run to the Final Four, that team, and they were the only team to ever be in the Elite Eight, and they knew that, and we talked about it a lot, and we all were rooting for them. Everybody's rooting for Alabama to break that record. We want Alabama to go to the Final Four, but at that time, those guys, it was just fun to get them all back together again, and I think there's been 3 times now. It was the 87 team, the 2002 team, and then the 2004 team. And every time it's been so special because you have to remember, too, everybody that's played at Alabama, everybody that's coached at Alabama, you have a special place in your heart for that. But to having played and then also being the head coach, it didn't happen. There's only one of those guys out there, and so for me, every time I've just been so thankful. I've just been very thankful that Alabama has done that, and for our players too. I think those were all just great moments.
So one of the most special moments from this past season, outside of Alabama getting to the Final Four, which was incredible, before Alabama actually played UConn, I saw Richard Hendricks there in Phoenix, and I go over to talk to him because I've gotten to know Richard, and he's been fantastic too. But then I see you, I see all the other players, I see all the former staff, and then I look on Twitter or X a few minutes later, and there is that beautiful picture of all of y'all there at the Final Four, and I can't tell you how much I love that. What did it mean to you to be there at the Final Four, but with your former players, former teammates, all that? How did that feel for you there in Phoenix?
It was such a great couple of days. Obviously NC State was there too, and they made the magical run as well. And so I had both schools, but I spent the majority of the time with everybody at Alabama, and I sat in Alabama's section. And when we turned around to take the picture, we had really no idea. It was like, hey, let's all take a picture, let's get it together. And so, we had asked somebody, I can't remember, somebody grabbed a camera or, their phones, and And next thing you know, you've got Enos Watley there, and obviously Herb Jones was there that played, here recently at Alabama, and then all of that crew that was kind of in our era there, and some older guys. Wendell Hudson was there that played back, in the 70s. But you turn around, all of a sudden, you just see cameras everywhere. I mean, it was one of those where I don't know how many people were taking pictures, but it was a lot, and it was just kind of cool, that it's kind of one of those where you all are back together. We have a common bond. I was so happy too for our fans to be at a Final Four, because that's all I ever wanted to do, is deliver that for them. And so for all of us to be there, be in the crowd together, to see the fans and kind of the way people showed their respect to that group of guys, it was just really, really something super cool.
Well, I mean, it's not a lie when we say everyone has waited their entire lives for that. So that is 100% true. And look, there's a lot of respect for all the former people of my generation. And again, because there's a lot of younger Alabama basketball fans, given the success of the last 5 years, and they're younger, and again, they don't know what Alabama did with the Rocket 8. They don't know what Coach Newton did in the 70s. They don't know what Coach Sanderson did in the 80s. And some of them may be so young they don't remember what you did in the early 2000s. So, it's important that we share the history and let them see what the program has done in the past. Let me ask you this. How does it feel, though, now when you look out and you have former players, now head coaches, Mo Williams, Antoine Petway? How does it feel for you as a coach, seeing your former players now as head coaches?
It makes me so proud because, and not just the coaches. I mean, obviously the coaches, those guys are great. But, when you get that group of guys together, you see all these guys that are so successful in life. I mean, they've matured, and that the Elite Eight team, those guys are now in their 40s. So, that age me,
that's crazy.
that aged me a bit. But, it's so, Mo was with me a couple years out here in California coaching, but, and Antoine, those two guys, I keep telling them they need to play. Those guys need to play all the time and have their teams play, but it just makes you feel really good. We had such good character guys through that time period. They were good players, but they were just such good character guys. I never doubted, like you mentioned, Richard Hendricks. I mean, that guy's going to be successful in life no matter what he does, and he's just done an amazing job. But all those guys have. They've just done such a great job, and so it makes you feel really good as a coach.
Well, yeah, you're right about that. Let me ask you real quickly, and again, gosh, this has been such a great conversation. I don't want to keep you too long, but this latest resurgence by Alabama basketball is drawing a lot of attention. But again, this is something that a lot of people have waited to see Alabama basketball come back. How do you view things as a former player? When you see the program achieving what it's achieving now, something that, again, that hasn't happened in quite a while. We went through kind of a really dry spell for like 12 years to be able to come back to where we are now.
Well, it makes me feel really good. And I'm a huge fan of Nate Oates. I think he's the right guy. He's kind of taken a different route to get there. And, as being a high school coach, and then even coming from Buffalo, I think when you first hire, Nate, the first question is can he adapt to the South? It's probably the same thing with our new football coach a little bit coming from Washington. But, he's done such a good job. And I tell you what I have really enjoyed with Nate is that, he has adapted quickly to the new rules, because it's a different game now as far as with NIL, the portal. You look at some of those guys on that roster last year, a couple years before that, the big kid from North Dakota, the guard that came from Hofstra, they had one kid from Fullerton out here, but they've done a great job with that. And I think if you're going to be successful nowadays, you have to do that. And Nate and the staff have just done a great, great job. And I hope, and I think they will. I also have great respect for Greg Byrne. I've gotten to know him over the years pretty well. I'm hoping, and I kind of hear, and the new arena. Are we going to build one? Are we not? Are we going to put some more lipstick on the pig? I don't know, but I really hope that we can find a way to build an arena. And I know that's a tricky one, but I do think that's kind of what's missing right now. It's the one thing. You look down there, what Auburn has done. Ole Miss built a really nice facility there, and it's probably the one thing we're missing. But I'm so excited for Nate. I'm excited, the guys he's brought in, the players. I think he's got a great coaching staff. So hopefully you need a little bit of luck too now in the tournament. Sometimes the ball bounces your way. Sometimes it doesn't. I was just with Jay Wright, when Villanova won it back to back, and, North Carolina hits a shot with 4 seconds to go. And next thing you know, they hit a shot to win it. If they miss the shot, they're not national champs. And so sometimes it's the bounce of the ball. But if you're knocking on the door enough times, I think we're going to break through, and I think we can get there.
Well, I was talking to Coach Sanderson, and what I told him was, when I look back at all those great teams, I always felt deep down that 82, 86, 87, and 90, that just any luck or better seeding, or just, not running into the hot team at the wrong time, any one of those teams could have easily gotten to the Final Four. They were so talented. I always felt that. And then I guess that's what makes the NCAA tournament great and also frustrating as a coach. Great for the fans because it's one game situation, but from a coaching perspective, you have one bad game and gosh, that's it. I know that's got to be frustrating from a coach's viewpoint.
It is. And what's interesting is, with this past Alabama team and then our team in 08, we both had to play UConn. And back when our team made the Elite Eight, I remember the game ends. We go back to the hotel. My assistant coach, Tom Asbury, he had been scouting UConn. He said, "You want the good news or the bad?" And I said, "Well, give me the good news first." He said, "Well, we're going to the Elite Eight." I said, "All right, good. What's the bad news?" He said, "We got no shot against UConn." But and then this year's team, I do think, again, we just happened to play a team that was probably the best team. If you said, okay, on opening day of the NCAA tournament, who's the best team? You could argue it was UConn or Purdue. And so Alabama just, if they would have gotten upset at some point in time during the tournament, you never know. And so sometimes that's what I mean. You got to have a little bit of luck. But I think Nate's teams, hopefully they're just going to keep knocking on the door, and then eventually they're going to find a way to bust through that thing.
Well, Coach, the hour has flown by, and I cannot thank you enough for this. I have had such a fun time reliving all the fun memories that I grew up with, watching you as a player and then also you as a coach. The only bad thing I'm going to mention is, Coach, we're only about 3 years away from the 40-year reunion of the 86-87 team. I just thought about that. Isn't that crazy? Doesn't that just seem surreal?
It's crazy. And time does fly. But boy, I tell you, we all know Alabama football, and it's always going to be there. But Alabama basketball, I think, has been so good over the years, and I'm excited to see that the people are excited about Alabama basketball. That warms my heart. So I'm happy for that.
There's always been a very passionate fan base for basketball. And then, yes, maybe we're not as vocal as we should be, but it's always been there. And then, yes, you won't believe it, Coach. We are here in June, and sports talk radio here in Tuscaloosa is still like 70% basketball versus football, because they're still talking about all the betting odds, the recruiting, the transfer.
That's a change. Yeah, that's a different deal there. Wow.
Yeah, I know, but it's a great time. So I'm going to appreciate every moment, just like, during those dry spells, I thought, man, I took the 80s for granted. It's like, I thought this would last forever. So, Coach, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for this. I really appreciate you taking time to do the podcast with us. This has been great. This is exactly what I thought it would be, and it has been so much fun. And again, I can't thank you enough for this.
Well, anytime, and keep it going, man. Keep plugging all the sports there, not just basketball, but all of them.
Oh, yeah, all Alabama sports. I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me, and it's been a lot of fun for me as well. But thank you.
All right. Thank you, Coach. Take care.
All right. Okay. All right.